Yeah, fantastic. We offer a mandala to the Buddha as if the Buddha were right here, which of course the Buddha is, the Dharmakaya, the pure, unmanifest, all-knowing, all-compassionate, all-wild, all-pervasive mind is everywhere. It can't not be. And but we just have to remember that. But we offer to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. It's very auspicious to do that. Saji perki jugshing metog tramri rablingji ni de genpadi sange jingdu mikte ulwaigi drokonam dag jingla chapashok. And now we imagine Buddha very happily receiving our offering. Hidam Guru Rashna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Now we take refuge in the Buddha, for those of us who rely upon the Buddha, reminding us of this. And then secondly, our motivation. The key thing is the motivation. The key thing is the motivation. It's not about dependent arising and emptiness, but we should talk about it because we don't understand it very well, I don't think. We'll, it's like, it is dependent arising. Understanding about this is dependent arising, so we'll talk about it a little bit, the benefit and necessity for pure motivation, best motivation. So, okay, the first two lines, taking refuge, the second two lines, expressing that we're going to listen to these teachings so that we can get the realization, so we can become a Buddha, so we can benefit sentient beings. Bottom line. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen ki personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog. Okay, so let's do this. Good. Let's read a few verses. We read a few. Go scroll down. I think the first day we read about 4 verses. Let's continue a little bit. Okay, so let's just start there. Yeah, benevolent. So this is Lama Tsongkhapa. Well, after he first really kind of, as far as the way he talks, that he sort of, it all came clear for him, the real understanding, Buddha's actual understanding of dependent arising and emptiness. And he's praising Buddha, just blissing out how amazing Buddha is for this brilliant finding about the universe. Benevolent teacher, you taught to help all living beings. Emptiness is the essence of those teachings. In its highest proof, dependent arising. Those claiming it proves the opposite, those denying its very existence, how will they grasp your teachings? For you, emptiness seen as dependent arising does not render as contradictory emptiness of self-nature and the ability to function. And this is the essence of the whole point of the two truths, and we've been discussing it. I'll say it again. For you, emptiness seen as dependent arising does not render as contradictory emptiness of self-nature and the ability to function. To hold to the opposite, however, that with emptiness there can be no function, and with function no emptiness, is to fall into a dangerous trap. In your teachings, therefore, knowledge of dependent arising is highly praised, but it will not be known to views of self or non-existence. They're another way of saying the two extremes. Non-dependence, you have said, is like the sky flower. In other words, it doesn't exist. Non-dependence, therefore, does not exist. Anything existent by its own nature contradicts existence by cause and circumstance. Nothing is not dependently arising. Nothing, therefore, is not empty of self-nature. Self-nature, you said, cannot be destroyed. Phenomena, therefore, possessed of nature, would render nirvana impossible. Samsara likewise would have no end. You spoke, therefore, with the roar of a lion, again and again on this absence of nature, and amid the assemblies of the wise, who dared to challenge you? The absence of self-nature anywhere, this arising because of that, Both presentations are true. And what need to say that both come together without contradiction? That'll do for now. So in other words, every second, what Tsongkhapa is saying there is what Buddha is saying, which is the reality of the universe, is that the way of presenting conventional reality, and we talked last week, and the shorthand for that is dependent arising. That is, as he says, the proof to prove ultimately, finally, that nothing has an intrinsic nature. And the shorthand for that is the word emptiness. You see, so much of this, the part of our problem is, one of our major problems is, we say, people say, I've been thinking about emptiness for years and I just don't understand it. Well, what we don't realize is that we don't know the words. I mean, it's sort of obvious. If you might say, I've been thinking about 1 + 1 is 2 for 30 years and I just can't understand it. But you don't know what plus means. You don't know what equals means. You don't know what 1 means. And you don't know what 2 means. This is why we've got to get the concepts clear, We've got to get the words clear. It's sort of obvious. If you want to learn, computer science, you want to learn French, everything starts with concepts, with the thoughts, because that's the reality we live in. Ultimately, concepts are not valid. They're valid, but they're not true. We've finally got to get rid of all concepts. When we finally achieve Buddha, we are beyond concepts. But it's absolutely fundamentally necessary to use them because that's where we're at. They're the stepping stone. So one of the biggest problems when we come to spiritual knowledge, people say, I don't want all that philosophical theory. I'm not intellectual. That's all just intellectual. I want to practice, they say. Well, that's like saying, I don't want to hear all those boring words about 1 teaspoon of this and 4 teaspoons of that and 3 eggs and 2 cups of flour. That's just intellectual. I just want to make a cake. We know you'd be laughed at. There's nobody on the planet, and this is what we're brilliant at in our culture. We are brilliant at learning how to do things. And that means we know we have to get the facts correct. It's so evident to us. It doesn't surprise us. We don't think it's inferior. We don't think it's foolish. We know you cannot possibly play Bach until you've internalized those complex musical theories deeply, until they're spontaneous in your mind. But it's extraordinary when it comes to things like this. As soon as we label something spiritual, we lose the plot. We become completely ridiculous, So, of course, when we look at something like Mahamudra, and I wanted to read you from Mahamudra, Lama Yeshe's book, and this is a really interesting point. Let's talk about this, because there are 2 classical ways of realizing emptiness. And the one that's described in Mahamudra is the one where Lama says, it's beyond philosophy. There's no theory, no philosophy, no dharma, no this, no that. And so, of course, it sounds very exciting. You just sit down and close your eyes and do some meditation, and you're going to realize emptiness because you don't need any theory. You don't need any philosophy, And that is true. It's true because it's directly experiential. But the point is, the irony is, the only person who's really qualified to do Mahamudra, to understand, to work with Mahamudra validly and get some experience, is a person who's got masses of the earlier stuff, the theory, under their belt. Whether it's last life or this life, doesn't matter. Because basically, the 2 ways of realizing emptiness, and Panchen Lama in his root text describes this. There's either the method of the classical one of learning all the theories. Let's just use the analogy of playing Bach, okay? There's either the traditional approach, the step-by-step approach. You learn the theories, you learn it all, you hear the thoughts, you understand all those complex theories, unbelievably complex, just intellectually. Then you train yourself with your hands for years and years on the piano, or the cello, or whatever it is. Until eventually you get the taste, the experience of Bach. And then it's beyond the theories. You've internalized it and practiced it to perfection. That's the obvious, typical way we learn. In our world, that's how we learn everything. Now, the other approach, as Panchen Lama said, is not the direct, is not the gradual. It's you go straight to the piano, and try to intuit Bach. Now, look how hard that would be. Look how hard that would be. That's like all these little children. I'm captivated by one. There's all these little kids who play music on YouTube, right? And there's one little Russian boy. He looks like a little angel. He's about 9 now, but he's playing since he's about 4 or 5. And he's just an astonishing musician. I mean, you know, professional musicians, I pointed out one of them to one of my friends who's a conductor and a musician, my friend Igor, maybe he was here, he wasn't. He couldn't believe, he said, you can't believe this, the musicianship in this 6-year-old body, this mind. Well, of course, there's no explanation in our culture. He's just this amazing, bizarre person who plops onto this earth and can play Bach at the age of 6. But we know very well, if we take the view of karma, he's done all the work in the past. Now he's doing Mahamudra. He's going straight to the experience. So, of course, it's necessary we do it. It's very powerful. And the way Lama Yeshe talks about in Mahamudra, the point of Mahamudra is, Mahamudra actually is referring to the emptiness of the mind. That's the final realization, the emptiness of the mind. The mind is the object of meditation. And Tsongkhapa talks about, and Lama talks about how Tsongkhapa talks about how because the mind is so astonishing, it's got such extraordinary qualities. And of course, we're not discussing the brain here. That when you can do the proper meditation, you get the single point of concentration. The object is the mind, the clarity, first the thoughts, and then the clarity of the mind, which is its conventional nature. And then at the same time, there's a very specific way to do it. You then conjure this subtle wisdom that observes your mind, and you're trying to catch the way ego grasping grasps at the self. That's the first one. That's seeing the emptiness of the self. And then the final one in the meditation is to see the emptiness of the mind itself. Because the mind is such an astonishing thing. And that's why we have to understand the Buddha's view of the mind. I mean, we just can't leap into emptiness without understanding the mind, you know? It's not possible. That's why I've been talking the last few weeks how each of the stages of the Lam Rim, the junior school level of karma, and then the high school level of knowing the mind and deconstructing the delusions and getting some renunciation, these are fundamentally necessary stepping stones to get to this level, you know, to get to this level where we now have to realize emptiness, you know. So there's these two approaches, and here classically we're looking at this approach, and it's necessary. And so to say, you see, the thing to say is, oh, I'm not an intellectual. I remember one person one time at Kopan, she said, I don't like all these boring philosophy talks. I'm not intellectual. I like experience. And I said, wonderful. What's your skill? She said, she's a graphic designer. I said, have you trained in it properly? She said, yes. So I said, did you not notice that when you did your training for 1 or 2 years and all the theories about typography and the shape and the colour of things and how to construct things into space, how to design, you used your brain, didn't you? You used all these concepts. You couldn't possibly just sit there intuitively and know how to do a graphic, you know, design a poster or design a book using proper fonts and typefaces and sizes and leading and kerning and this and that without learning the theories first. And she heard it. So it's kind of, we're naive when we think of intellectual. The other thing is, we say we're not intellectual. I mean, on the most basic level, it's a lie. What do you think anger and attachment are? They're the most elaborate we're the most creative conceptual stories in the universe. They're completely made up stories. And we live at that level of conceptuality. And they're concepts that are completely in sync with nothing. So we are totally intellectual. The more emotional we are, the more intellectual we are, because all of our emotions are rooted in these bizarre misconceptions. So we really don't see our mind in the way Buddha talks at all, you know. So we learn the language. We've got to squeeze your brain to do that. You've got to squeeze your brain to learn the language, to learn the words. So, you know, you say, I've been thinking about it. I said, one woman, she said, I've been thinking about it for 30 years. I said, what is emptiness? What's the definition? She said, oh, I don't know. I said, well, strictly speaking, if that's the case, how could you be thinking about it for 30 years? That's like saying you don't know what 1 is or 2, but I've been thinking about 1 + 1 is 2. You haven't been. You've just been sitting there dumbly saying the words but not giving them meaning. So in my house just here, I've got across the wall, where I sit and do my prayers in this position, as well as I do a few prayers sometimes when I do my practice. And when my eyes are open, I've got on the opposite wall, there's a beautiful mantra. It's on I think it's on Mani Padme Hung, but this is the point now. It's Tibetan. It's Tibetan writing. Now, I've been seeing that for 40, I've been seeing those letters for 45 years. I promise. Since I first met the Dharma, I've been seeing Tibetan letters. Still, I look and I haven't made the effort, put it that way. I haven't made the effort to look into the meaning of those lines. So therefore, it's like saying, I've been trying to write Tibetan I've been trying to read Tibetan for 30 years. I haven't made the effort to push my mind into learning and memorizing that Om Mani Padme Hum. I've not done that. I vaguely remember when I look at it, but it doesn't come immediately because I haven't. Okay, I've decided not to, whatever reason. I should maybe before I die. I might, you never know. I know whenever I went to Kopan Monastery, Lama Lunda, he always spoke Tibetan to me, and he just showing me how I was just always embarrassed, always completely ashamed that I can't speak Tibetan, you know. It's very fascinating. They say it's a wonderful little technique. They say, there's a lovely saying in Tibetan, when you're feeling proud and arrogant, which is overstating your own importance, all you've got to do is think of one thing you can't do. And that's all I have to do when I say to myself, I can't speak Tibetan. So I'm quiet. But every time you feel low self-esteem, you tell yourself something you can do. That's very brilliant, isn't it? Very skillful, very marvellous. So we've got to make the effort to learn the words. So the words I'm saying here, you know, I mean, I know I had to learn them. I studied first with Geshe Tekchok when I was living in England in the early 80s, late 70s. And I learned. I had a couple of years of philosophy, you know. I'm so grateful. It's been the basis of anything I've been known since. It's extraordinary. I'm so grateful. So, so grateful. But I really engaged in it, you know. I really engaged in squeezing my brain, as Lama Yeshe puts it, you know. So I learned the terminology. I mean, I've forgotten much of it. I learned all the Buddha's tenets. I couldn't tell you the different views of emptiness, detailed, I've forgotten. But I learned the fundamental terms, you know, the fundamental terms. So then over these years, because Lama Zopa told me 10 years later, about 10 years later, in 87, he told me I was supposed to teach. You know, I was very surprised, so I did my best. And this is the point. Every time I have to say these words over these years, it gets a bit deeper for me. So I'm learning, every time I'm speaking it, the meaning gets a bit clearer. Every time I say it, the meaning gets a bit clearer. So I'm so grateful, you know. Thank you for listening. You're giving me my opportunity to do my analytical meditation out loud. Just as well I'm a show-off, isn't it? Anyway, blah, blah. So we need to learn the words, you know. So the whole thing here is, okay, so dependent, things are dependent. On the face of it, it's just a boring word. Like, who cares, you know? We don't talk like this. But it's actually that word dependent is presenting the entire view of the universe, entire view of Buddha. That everything exists interdependently. So that's why when we looked at the, you know, what a powerful thing even to help us understand this, when we went to high school and talked about the mind and how we have to distinguish between the delusions and the virtues. The delusions and the virtues. Remember, Buddha divides all the contents of our mind into three categories. The delusions, the virtues, and then the mechanics. The bits and pieces that make us do things, you know? That enable us to do things. It's my way of putting it. It's roughly like that. So the crucial job for the Buddha is to distinguish between the delusions and the virtues. Well, this is where we have to understand the key characteristic of the delusions, you know, is that they're misconceptions. They're concepts, they're conceptual opinions, and they don't have a valid basis. That's what we really begin to learn the way, when that prepares us, when we understand about how attachment and anger aren't valid concepts. That leads us to understand more clearly as we get to emptiness, when we look at the root delusion, and to realise how ignorance, mat-rigpa, known colloquially as ego grasping, how it is not a valid concept. And a valid concept, very simple, we discussed this all last week, we're talking about, you know, using one of the many arguments, debates we need to use to help our mind become familiar with emptiness. We looked at the one about if there's something exists, it's either one or it's many. And we were looking at the whole business, I have an iPad and a cup, I have a nose and an ear, and trying to look at this familiarity about how concepts, you know, cognize things. So these misconceptions, this is the key to understanding the entirety of the Buddha's path and the entirety of Buddha's method to get us to achieve Buddhahood, or at least certainly liberation, or all the way, is that attachment, anger, pride, all these unhappy emotions. And that's the thing for us. Mostly we know they've got the unhappy experience, and they're called disturbing emotions. And mainly at the second level of practice in high school, in the middle scope, when we're getting renunciation, we're mainly looking at that aspect, how they're painful, how they're the cause of our pain, you know. I'll never forget, this is how deep these states of mind go, according to the Buddhist view. I remember Lama Zopa saying one time, one of my friends back in the 70s, who was at Kopan, she said she remembers this. Rinpoche said, okay, before I say that, remember the Buddhist psychological model refers to the minds of every being in the universe, all the hells, spirits, animals, humans, gods, you know, form and formless beings, every being in the universe, up to the Buddha. This model of the mind is a vast world view of the mind and how it functions. Because they're all mind possessors, remember. Semchen, mind possessor, the term we translate as sentient being. So Lama Zopa said at Kopan, if we could just for a moment have a direct experience of the mind of our little dog, our cute little dog, who we think is so content and so happy and so gorgeous. Happy, meaning not suffering. It's okay? Not suffering. He said, just for a moment, if you had a direct experience of their mind, the mental suffering would be so unbearable, we would not want to waste another second of this precious human life. Now that is beyond shocking, isn't it? That's really quite a shocking, sobering thought. Because not one of us would ever think that our dog is suffering mentally, because we don't look at the mind, isn't it? We see the gross level, the disturbingness. So if we kick the dog, we see it suffering then. But the cute little dog sitting there, not in a million years can we see that it's got mental suffering, which is called ignorance, ego grasping. And that's why we can't see other humans either. If a person smiles, we get a vague idea they might be happy. If they look a bit freaked out, we get a vague idea they might be suffering. But we really can't tell, because we can't see the mind at all. So this is how deep, this is the depth to which the Buddha says we need to go in our own minds, and it's only then that we have renunciation. But so what I'm getting at here is that's the disturbingness. But what about the delusional aspect, the misconception aspect? That's there, it's implicit, like I said last week, I think. And that's really only directly looked at when we look at ignorance, the root delusion. The one that is underpinning attachment and aversion, the three poisons, and all the other 83,997 delusions, you know. This is the key thing. When we can begin to understand how we have misconceptions, that's the root of all the suffering. The disturbingness is just a function, is just an expression, is just a manifestation. The suffering is just a manifestation. That emotional pain is a manifestation of these delusions, the misconceptions. So conceptions. So we live in these misconceptions now. Luckily, thank God. Thank you, not luckily and not thank God, but get my point, you know. We have the virtues. They're our saving grace. And the one point I'm going to make here, and this is the point I'm trying to say, how interdependence, it just pervades the universe. It's implicit in everything. That when things are, put it this way, I've mentioned this, if Mary Ellen and I are having a friendly conversation, immediately you look at us, you can see our body language, it's indicating that we're friendly. That means love is prevailing in our mind. That's a virtue. What is love? Love is defined as a thought. It's a concept also. That's the point, remember. That thought that thinks, may she be happy, and even thinks, delights in her happiness. That's love. Then she tells me about her headache, so that I have compassion. That's another thought. And that's defined as a thought that sees another's suffering and wishes they didn't have it. Or empathy, you know. So you can immediately deduce, oh, look at Mary Ellen and Robina, they're looking really friendly, that love and compassion are prevailing. Fundamentally, these two. That means my attachment to me and what I want, and Mary Ellen's attachment to what she wants, they're kind of taking second place. They become quiet. They're still under there. Don't worry about it. Until you've achieved nirvana, they're there, baby. But they become quiet. The virtues come to the front. Now look at the consequence of that. Everything is working beautifully. She speaks, I listen. I listen, she speaks. Everything's interdependent. I move this way, she moves that way. Think of it simply. There's real harmony. When all the elements are working beautifully, that's called harmony. Everything works. That's the fruit of virtuous karma. The elements from 40 million eons ago, we created virtue of not killing, not lying and not stealing, such that now the elements are just delicious and beautiful and sweet smelling and tasty and lovely, and the moon comes up at the right time and goes down at the right time. Everything works beautifully, harmoniously. That's an evident expression of interdependence. All the bits work nicely. A right amount of rain comes, the right seed ripens, the right flower comes, it tastes best. That's the fruit of virtue. Now, non-virtue, when we lie and steal and kill, you're going to get the environment of exactly the opposite. And look at now COVID-19. This is a direct result, the environmental karma of past killing and the experience similar to the cause of past killing. Everything's jangled and ugly and paranoid and angry and distressing and miserable. It's the direct result of a predominance of misconceptions in our mind, and then the actions we do on the basis of those misconceptions that then ripen in the future as suffering elements, suffering environments, suffering people. So dependence is implicit in all of this. Interdependence, you know. So the non-virtues, the delusions, are misconceptions. They're thoughts that are not valid. So not valid. A valid thought is a thought that has an object, a referent object, an object that it cognizes, and they're in sync. So simply speaking, at the most simple conventional level, and this is where we have to start when we start to learn about dependent arising, the first thing we have to do, this is why, the first thing we have to do is establish conventionally what is that. Because we then have to understand its ultimate nature, its emptiness. But you've got to first establish something. Establish it. That's a concept. This is called, we tend to use the term of the thermos company, most popular company probably, so we now use it as a generic term for a flat bottom metal container, in this case, that keeps your tea warm, we call it a thermos. So we've agreed upon that. Everybody in this room, when I say that word English, you can see it, you can hear it, we all buy into the meaning. That's a valid concept. We've established that and we all agree. That's what makes it valid. We establish it. This is enough now to prove emptiness, actually. So then you give the definition. This is all concepts, and this is a valid concept. So dependent arising, what we've got to first do is at least get clear, conventionally, get all the right concepts, all get our ducks in a row about the right concepts. That is this, it's a definition, it functions in this way, and once we've established validly, conventionally what it is, then we can get on with the business of understanding it ultimately. So the trouble with the delusions is, there's two kinds, I forget the right words, all the translators use different words. There's a valid concept, but still within that, we recognize, we cognize a black thermos, but there's still wrong concepts in there. Underneath that, ego grasping, it's so primordial we don't notice it, is seeing a self-existent black thermos. So the black thermos is correct, but the seeing it as self-existent is not correct. So there's still a root problem. So even with me and Mary Ellen being kind to each other, and friendly and loving and compassionate, that's valid. That's the next step. At least it's not a made-up story of you're so divine or you're completely ugly, you're the cause of all my suffering. They're concepts, but they've got no basis of any kind in any reality whatsoever. They're complete la-la rubbish. But at least love and compassion are one step forward. We've cut away the gross delusional aspect of over-exaggerating or under-exaggerating her, and that's where the virtues are so powerful. But they're still rooted in the root delusion, this I am still thinking self-existent I have self-existent love for self-existent Mary Ellen. And Mary Ellen has self-existent Mary Ellen has self-existent compassion for self-existent Robina. That's the next one that has to get removed at the deeper level when we get to emptiness. So we've got to go one step at a time. That's the whole path. Remember, the first level, at least control the servants of the maniac delusions. Then you begin to control the delusions. Then you begin to develop virtues. Then you get to cut the root of the misconception that underpins all of that, you know. There's so much logic to all of it, but we just have to keep becoming familiar, keep studying it, thinking about it, listening to it. So the key thing we're discussing here is conceptual stories. Our mind is driven by these, and we've been practicing for eons in the same way that little Russian boy, I can't think of his name, who's on YouTube, he's been practicing. Clearly, he came into this life, age 3, 4, off he went. And because he's programmed in his mind, he's learned it. It was all there. So he also, no doubt, has come in with attachment. He maybe come in with anger. Who knows? He might be a murderer as well. We don't know. We haven't seen the evidence yet. But you come programmed with these. And that's why this work is so hard to do, because the habits are so deep and because we take them as a given, and they're so implicit, they're so primordial, they're so automatic, they're so instinctive that we don't even notice. This is the problem. You know? That's why the whole path is so logically structured. Control the body and speech first, then begin to control the grosser level of the delusions, the disturbingness of them, and start to harness the energy of your mind. Then you get to the bodhisattva path and start to enhance the virtues. Then we're ready for the 6 perfections, where we keep practicing. The first 4 are perfecting the compassion wing, going from life to life to life, benefiting sentient beings, practicing morality, generosity, morality, patience and perseverance, and then in our meditation, life after life, perfecting our realization of reality. It's so logical. The whole thing is so logically presented. The whole universe, Buddha says, is created by concepts. This is a very bizarre idea. You know? The whole universe, all the hell realms. What do you think that is? What do you think a hell realm is? If it exists, as Buddha is saying, what is it? As Lama Yeshe says, it's not some place where the devil is waiting, saying, ha ha, I'm waiting for Lama Yeshe. It's not self-existent. It's not made by some creator. It's a very schizophrenic, dualistic view for the Buddha. Very bizarre. Not like that. Like everything, as Lama Zopa says, it's our karmic appearance. It's the habit. You know, as I said before, Lama Zopa, he talks about in the Kala Chakra Tantra how there's an intimate relationship between the body and mind. This is the Vajrayana model, but it's very powerful to understand this. Just every time, you know, got the 72,000 subtle channels coursing through your body, and coursing through those channels are all these different wind energies, and connected inextricably to those wind energies is all your states of mind. So every time you're angry, just angry thought, just an angry thought. It programs you in anger, so you keep being angry. Second, it pollutes the wind energies connected to your anger, and that eventually karmically manifests as sickness. And then many, many, many lifetimes it eventually manifests, it impacts upon the external elements. And guess what? You get born in an environment that's the directors of polluted, destructive, disharmonious elements. Everything comes from the mind. Everything starts in every mind of every sentient being in the universe. We don't need creating. We don't need an external being who runs the show. And the same reason, we don't need an internal boss called an I. Don't need that. Every millisecond of what we think and then do and say is the process that creates the universe. And it's all concepts. It starts with concepts, thoughts, opinions, viewpoints. So we have to work out the valid ones, chuck out the rubbish ones, get the valid ones, and get the final right ones. And then we're Buddha. Then we're Buddha. It's all laid out. This worldview. This coherent worldview. Okay, don't believe it. Go check it yourself, you know. So we didn't talk much about Buddha nature, and this is a really nice little discussion. I mean, not that I know much, but I'll say what I can. As Tsongkhapa just said, quoting Buddha, there's nothing that isn't dependent arising, therefore there's nothing that is empty. There's not empty. This is not possible. This is the point. And this is why the Prasangika Madhyamika view is so clean and clear and beautiful. It's complete, you know. All the other schools say, sort of reserve certain things that have to be self-existent. And going from the grossest level through the Vaishnavabhashikas, to the Sautrantikas, to the Chittamatras, to the earlier Madhyamikas, to the Prasangika, Everyone keeps asserting there has to be something. There's got to be something intrinsic. There's got to be something independent. There's got to be something inherent. There's different definitions. But the Prasangikas are the only ones who finally chuck everything out and say, no, there's not one atom of anything that isn't dependent arising. And there's not one atom therefore of anything that isn't empty. It's very clean. It's almost simpler, But it's scary. Because as Lama Zopa says, using the two truths, this incredible kind of way they anchor each other, the two truths. When you realised, he said, there's not one atom of an iPad there. I've got my iPad right here, ready to read from. When you realise the emptiness of the iPad, when you realise that from the side of the iPad, there is not anything there, not even an atom, basically, that makes it an iPad, meaning there's nothing intrinsic, meaning there's nothing there that you can point to that isn't anything else. There can't be. So our mistake, now I'm stop Lama's open for a minute, but then our mistake is, and that's what Tsongkhapa was implying, or as he said in another text, when we hear that, of course we hear, okay, there's no iPad. So what we do is, that's the extreme view, and that you chuck the baby out with the bathwater. It's a great saying in English. That's nihilism. And that apparently, all the texts say, is the worst mistake and the commonest misunderstanding of emptiness. The commonest misunderstanding and the easiest one to fall into. As Tsongkhapa says, it's falling into the abyss of the great mistake. But as Lama Zopa says, when you realise the emptiness of the iPad, it's as if there's no iPad. Now we go to dependent arising, but there is. There is a dependent arising iPad. There is an iPad that does exist in dependence upon, as Tsongkhapa says, as he was translated, causes and circumstances. There is. Now, the mistake there, as soon as we hear that, we overstate the iPad and we grasp at it and go, oh, thank God there's an iPad after all. Phew. That's the other mistake. Now, that mistake, okay, I'll finish with Lama Zopa, but then he says, but then there is an iPad, but it's so subtle, what does exist is so subtle, it's if it doesn't exist. There's an incredible way of putting it. When we think there's nothing, when there's no iPad, it's as if there's no iPad. But there is. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. This is a perfect way to put the two truths. Even just to say those words, not sure what it means, don't worry. Prabhupada says even you don't know the meaning of the word emptiness, just to say it and think it sows the seed. That's why I get the right words. You've got to get the right words. There's no question. You've got to get the right words. You've got to get the right words. If we want to choose between these two truths, it's interesting. The nihilistic view, you could say, actually the nihilistic view is, in the different interpretations of Buddha's teachings around the world and in the different views that have been around for centuries, there is a view, and this is traditionally the view in the what's called in the Theravadan tradition, the Burma, Thailand, and everything. And it's not being sectarian. It's just quoting what people say. This is the facts. These are the teachings. And when you learn I remember when I studied Buddhist tenets, I recall that Theravadan was, I forget now, was the only one of the remaining 18 or something sub-schools of one of those schools of thought. I think in the Sautrantikas, I'm not sure, or maybe the Vaibhashikas. I can't remember. So that's what we know generically now as the Theravadan teachings, which is actually what we call the Hinayana, which is a junior school and high school, which is the first wing of the bird. When you graduate there, you achieve your own nirvana, you achieve your own liberation. Now those schools of thought, you will learn that if you go to Burma or Thailand. You'll be taught that when you've achieved liberation, in one life or another, you've cut the root you've realised emptiness, and then over several lives you perfect that realisation, you remove all the delusions and their imprints, and then in that life you've achieved that your nirvana, and you live for the rest of your life. But when you die, not just delusions, not just suffering ceases, but your mind ceases as well. So you disappear like a puff of smoke. Well, as His Holiness said very politely, we Mahayanas have a problem with that. Because the Mahayana view says the mind is beginningless and endless. So that's a major difference in philosophical interpretations of Buddha's teachings. So from one point of view, you could say that view of when there's literally nothing, that's the whole point. That's what they mean. There is nothing. You go into nothing. You could argue that's an example of a nihilistic philosophy. When you literally cease, there's nothing left. That is the Theravadan view. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just stating what's in the teachings, you know. The other extreme is, which is the internalistic view, there is something there. That's expressed philosophically in the world as the creator religions. And the sense of the soul, same philosophical view, something permanent, uncaused, inherent, intrinsic. That's the eternalistic view, philosophically speaking. Now, if you want to choose one of these views, nihilism or eternalism, eternalism's better, karmically. Because at least there's virtue there. You know? It's interesting. We ended up last time with, I think, we ended up with a story about Lama Zopa, you know, the head, and having no fear. This is a very interesting point. This is a very fascinating one. And again, helps us, the more we do the first level, second level of practice, we get to understand this part. That the disturbingness itself, which is what we call our suffering in daily life, the panic when things go wrong, the anxiety, the freak out, the anger, the despair, the denial, what we call PTSD, which is just living in denial of everything, like we talked. That's all a function of the delusions. And so ego grasping, the root delusion, maripa, the one that believes in an intrinsic me, the subtlest of all, that underpins all the others. Its nature in particular, and the nature of all the delusions that are expressed as a result, is fear. This is what's fascinating. This is what's fascinating. I mean, fear in general, if you look there's discussions with this, but you look in the list of the states of mind, when you study Lorig, and you won't find a state of mind called fear. And it seems to me it's because all the delusions, and this is the point, because they're invalid concepts, and we've been believing in them for eons. We've been believing in things that don't exist. We've been believing in things that don't exist for eons. And so because we uphold every second that story, we're convinced there must be a cake out there that'll make me happy. We're convinced that this thing will last forever. We're convinced that this happened or this happened. We're convinced that he's the cause of my suffering. I'm convinced that he's the cause of all my happiness. All these delusions are frantic. Their nature is frantic fear, naturally. Because they're lies. They are lies. If you've believed, it's a really simple example, if you've got a $5 note but you've believed for so long it's 50, you've convinced yourself it's 50, it even appears to your eyes as 50, but you've believed in it for eons, and even though you go to the shop and someone knocks you back and says it's only 5, you try again tomorrow, and you try again tomorrow because you believed it for so long. The habit is so primordial. This is where we really have to see how hysterical we are, you know. I mean, surely if the first time you discover that the cake didn't give you bliss and happiness, that in the end you vomited, you go, oh, that didn't work, I won't try again. No, we've been trying for eons to get a cake to make us happy. Eons. We keep trying every day. It's like we've lost our memory from the day before, because we're so believing, it's so deeply ingrained in our mind, dug deep as a groove in our mind. Even though our intelligence is observing that was absurd, Robina, it didn't bring you what you thought it would, but attachment is addicted. This is how deeply suffering we are. And so all those delusions, we can see even analytically how they're not true, but we believe in them. And we're frantic and we keep trying. We go tomorrow and we'll try and spend that $5 note and get $50 worth. We keep seeing it's 50, we believe it's 50, and we believe for eons. So what do you think that will build up in you? Incredible stress, incredible anxiety, incredible panic. Because you've done it a million times before, but you keep trying because you just can't get it, that it's not $50. I mean, hear that example. That's how delusions function. So of course it's built up to make you miserable. Disappointment is the very first thing that happens when your attachment doesn't get what it wants. And that's a mild level of anger. That's why anger is the response in general, but it depends on how you express it. Volatile people shout and yell. Quieter people just get annoyed, upset, irritated, frustrated. This is normal world. That's the response from thwarted attachment. You tried yet again to spend your $50 and it's only $5 and you're disappointed. Every time, eons and eons and eons. So of course fear is absolutely embedded, because what these delusions are believing in don't exist. So finally, when you get the plot, finally in subtle concentration, finally when you see the truth, finally the truth is, which has always been there. That's the point about emptiness. Emptiness of intrinsic nature and dependent arising aren't imposed by the Buddha, painted on top of things. Emptiness and dependent arising are the way things exist. In other words, $5 is the truth. Dependent on emptiness, dependent arising are the truth. And they're right there staring at you. The $5 is staring at you every day. It's right there staring you in the face, but you can't see it. That's how deeply suffering we are, Addicted, habit. So fear is the nature of all these delusions, because they're not valid concepts, because there's no referent object out there. The referent object, the cake is there, yeah, but not the delicious cake is not. The divine delicious cake that'll make me happy from its own side, that cake doesn't exist. That cake doesn't exist. There is a note with numbers on it, but the one with 50 on it, that doesn't exist. There's a basis there, a $5 note. There is a cake there as a basis, but not the cake you see. That's the point. That's the point. And that's proving the two truths here. There is a note with a number on it. It is money, you're right. There is a cake, it's chocolate cake, you're right. So if you thought it was carrot cake, you'd have 2 mistakes. That's like a serious problem. That's like thinking 1 + 1 is 3. No. At least you're correct in saying validly it is a cake. That's a valid statement. That's a dependent arising, a valid statement. It is a chocolate cake on a plate. Correct, correct, correct. Tick the boxes. But it's not the cake you see. There is a note there, but it's not the note you see. So one day when you finally see the truth, which has always been there, emptiness is always how things are. And this is the 2 truths again, remember. Emptiness is not some separate thing. The lack of intrinsic nature of a thermos exists right on the thermos. This is, remember, in the Heart Sutra. This is a key way to know you'll never fall into the abyss of the great mistake. The lack of intrinsic nature of the black thermos, the lack of the empty black, the emptiness of the intrinsic black thermos, the emptiness of the inherent black thermos is a characteristic existing on the black thermos. So wherever there's the black thermos, there is emptiness of inherent black thermos. And wherever there's an emptiness of inherent black thermos, it's right there, inseparably existing with the dependent arising black thermos. So the truth is always there. It's staring at us. But our karmic appearances are so strong from habits. And so I'm talking here about fear. So fear is in the nature. Especially fear, most primordial arises when ego grasping comes to the surface. Mostly ego grasping is there like a sleeping lion. So it's only when we're attacked or insulted or offended or nearly knocked over by the car or whatever, when something terrible happens. It's only then it wakes up and the heart starts to beat faster. And you have a panic attack. That's the manifestation of the fear of ego grasping. And as Lama says in Mahamudra, when you have realized emptiness, when you've finally seen the truth, there's only $5 and not 50. When you've finally seen the truth, that there is a depending arising I, but it's empty of intrinsic nature, then you're relaxed. Therefore fear doesn't come.
Venerable Robina?
Yes. Yes.
Is it okay if I ask I'm going to try to restate what I think you're saying to make sure that I understand it.
Okay,
really
Denise, go.
The nature of ego grasping is fear. The more fear we have, the stronger a self that is not dependent on others arises. That self doesn't understand its interconnectedness.
Sorry, what the last phrase? The last phrase. So far you were okay, but what was that last phrase?
That self doesn't understand its interconnectedness.
No, because the self doesn't, no, that self doesn't exist. So we don't just say the mind doesn't understand the interconnectedness of what, though? What are you saying here? Interconnectedness of what, darling?
To others, to everything
Well,
else.
no, okay, that's good enough. That's okay. But the last bit was the first part was good enough. Yes.
Then I have the fear then grows, thinking all along that it creates itself. It must be selfish and feeds itself rather than feeding the others that it depends upon.
What does, sweetheart? What does that?
Self that we create.
Yeah, that's right. Because the really analytical, correct, the philosophical correct way to say it is that the I that we, the belief in this intrinsic me causes us to have that attachment and anger and cling and grasp and fantasizes. Yes, and put me first and others second and separates us. That's all correct, yes. The mind does all the mistakes, yeah. That's exactly right. These misconceptions do all those mistakes. That's exactly right. And the more, in other words, this is right. So as we were saying back before, the more ego grasping, the more attachment, the more aversion, the more arrogance, the more whatever the other variations are, the more, and this is the crucial point, the more separate we are from everything. That's what it does. And the more ignorance, the more suffering, the more separate. That's the point. The separateness.
Yes.
A separateness.
Yes.
And you can see it as evident. You can't think of yourself. Look at anybody you know is really self-centered. They're totally lonely, and they see the whole universe is caught up in their own views of themselves. Of course, this is inevitable, inexorable. This is the way it is, yes. So fear is the root of all of these delusions, and that's really what called our suffering. That's what our suffering is, anger. Look at a person being angry. They're having a complete hysterical mental breakdown. But we're so familiar with it, we just think, oh, that's just anger, Look at a person who's jealous, paranoid. They're all just extreme consequences of attachment and anger, and the other variations. And their nature is fear. Their nature, and it's all rooted in a separate I. And that's the very point. This ego grasping, its fundamental job does, it creates the separate I. And this sounds very cosmic because we assume that the world consists of separate I's. And it does, conventionally. But in our philosophical models and our neuroscience and our psychological models in the West, we reinforce that sense of a separate I. We reinforce ego grasping. So this is why it sounds so abstract, when you've realized emptiness and you've got bodhicitta, when you're a Buddha, quite literally, there's not even an atom of a sense of a separate I. It's as if your sense of I is as big as the universe now and encompasses every single being, as if they were you. Not to mention you have the wisdom to see their minds perfectly, and not to mention you have this infinite empathy for everyone and the power to manifest in whatever body you need to benefit all of them equally for eternity. So the idea of a Buddha is pretty outrageous,
In the last 5 or 6 months, I'm feeling a kind of sadness, that goes deep and deep and deep, And if I don't fight this, I get into a kind of depression, like I don't want to practice, I don't want to get out of bed.
Yes.
So now listening, I talked to my doctor, I'm taking some homeopathics, I'm fighting it. But I was thinking, listening to you now, you gave 2 paths for me, which I don't know I should follow first. One is that this depression is just ego grasping because I can't find any I don't have any reason to be like this, I'm competitive to what we are living in Brazil and so ever, but, personally, it's not attaching me. I could even study with you, which was a dream for years. Or I should just consider this is empty.
I understand.
And don't take care.
I understand, darling. There's 2 kinds of approaches. It's true. That's a very good point. But see, when we understand the depth of the suffering of attachment, eons old, and we come into this life, and this is the thing that's very hard for us, the default feeling that comes as a result of countless lives of practicing attachment is the feeling of not being satisfied. We're not satisfied. Whatever's happening, second by second, we're not satisfied. And so that's why it then comes to the next level of attachment. We think, oh, I'll have a cake, I'll do this, I'll go there. Every second we're doing that, not just in life terms, I'll get a husband or not, but every second the mind is dissatisfied. Every second, this is the point, sweetheart, it's natural to feel this. This is the way samsara is. It's because of attachment. So then, if we're so, if you're a person who doesn't shout and yell very much when bad things go on or you don't get what you want, then it'll just be a pervasive feeling, as you're calling it, of like, low, depressed. It's the way the mind is. So that's why we have to recognize, know that just intellectually. It's natural to feel this way. It's natural. The universe feels it. So that's why if we're busy enough in our lives with enough children and houses and husbands and jobs and responsibilities, we're so caught up in those things, we don't have time to pay attention to what arises in the mind. But if we haven't got much else to do, then we sink into this kind of default view of boredom or dissatisfaction, or things aren't enough. It'll be irritated or it'll be just quiet. So there is nothing logically going on. You're absolutely right. It's the function of having attachment and therefore aversion. Because even when, because attachment is always feeling something's missing, so always wants something. So we go to do this, and we move our body, we go to sleep, we get up, we go to breakfast, we stop eating, we start eating. We do 1,000 activities a day, and they're all in response to attachment, looking for something that might bring us happiness. But we call it normal daily life. So for while you're eating your breakfast, you're all excited because you're getting the delicious food or your best cup of coffee in the morning. So for a moment, the mind is perky and happy. And then you sink back into the nothingness again after you've had the coffee. This is normal behavior. This is samsara. So when we know it's normal, we keep recognizing that, and we try to stop believing. We have the feeling, but we don't believe it's true. There is nothing wrong. If you're practicing and keeping your vows and helping the center and doing all your things, you mightn't see the results yet, but that's the way to live our life now. We're sowing brand new seeds. We're putting the programming in for future happiness and joy and contentment. But we have to be humble and patient. So accept it, see it, but don't believe it. Know that you are okay. There is nothing wrong. You are doing your best. You are doing everything. You are a good person. But we forget to say all those words. We have to keep saying those words, darling, and training our mind and thinking differently.
Thank you so much.
Good, sweetheart.
Thank you so much.
Darling. Good. We've got to be brave. You understand, darling?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
And it's a variation of every single person. We all have a variation of exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Do you understand, darling? And that's why they say, sweetheart, until we have, it's like single point of concentration, we're not even going to experience much joy. We want some joy, So the usual way we get joy is by having the great cake or hugging our friend or laughing with somebody. And temporarily joy does arise. And joy is not distressed because it's a virtue. But we can't sustain that joy. So it's only when you've got single point of concentration you're going to sustain that joy. Not to mention having realization of emptiness. And that's when you meet people like Lama Zopa, who's like hysterically joyful all the time. You can't even believe the man so ridiculously joyful. You can't understand it, because his mind is completely in bliss all the time. Delusions are gone, wisdom is there, compassion is there, and the mind is naturally joyful all the time.
Yeah.
So just keep working on it, baby, sowing the seeds and having confidence in the process.
Thank you so
much.
Good,
darling. Thank you for that question. So beneficial. Any more questions? Okay, let's talk about Buddha nature then, what it means. Buddha nature. We've all got Buddha nature, we hear, So basically, there's conventional Buddha nature and there's ultimate Buddha nature. So ultimate Buddha nature literally is the term used to refer to the emptiness of your mind. That's what it means. In other words, because your mind, which is beginningless and endless, because your mind possesses naturally the potential to be free of all suffering and its causes. And that's accomplished by finally perfecting your realization of emptiness, achieving your nirvana, achieving your liberation. Forget bodhicitta. Well, no, we're talking Buddha nature here, so it has to include that. That every mind just naturally possesses that potential, and to become a Buddha, Buddha, rid of all the rubbish, full of all the goodness. You've perfected. So if you want to say, we talk about like our natural state, that's our natural state. That's perfection is almost, that's normal. Buddha's view of normal is when you're a Buddha. Everything less than that, you're abnormal. You're mentally ill, okay? Because you've still got delusions polluting your mind. Put it that way. I mean, our baseline of normal in our world is deep mental illness for the Buddha, okay? We've got a very low baseline. A baseline in our culture is having some anger, some jealousy, some pride, some depression. I mean, this for Buddha is very depressing. He's gone way further, and he says, no, baby. You can rid the mind. This, and why? So Buddha nature is referring literally to the emptiness of the mind. And the fact that the mind, like everything else, but here we're talking about the mind, the fact that the mind, like everything, lacks intrinsic nature. Because of that, we can become Buddha. In other words, another way of putting it, because the mind is empty, because everything's empty, it exists. Things exist because they're empty. Things that aren't empty can't exist. Not possible. So mind in its nature possesses the potential to be utterly free of delusions. And this is not too complicated theoretically. So we have to understand it. When we understand that all delusions are conceptual stories that are embellishments, they're embellishments. They're embellishments. They're distortions. They're exaggerations. They're bells and whistles that we add on top of what is there. As Lama Zopa says, all the delusions decorate on top of what is there. Layers upon layers of characteristics that aren't there. So, the mind, all minds, our mind is our capacity for cognition, okay? And all minds naturally possess the potential to be free of the delusions, all the misconceptions. And why? It's very simple. This is proving Buddhahood. This is proving we can become Buddha. Ego grasping is a misconception. Attachment that it gives rise to is a misconception. Anger that comes from that is a misconception, and all the other 83,997 misconceptions. So a misconception is a disconnect between what you think and what is there. It's very simple. When we understand that all these emotions and misconceptions are rooted in misconceptions, and that we can remove misconceptions, when we understand misconceptions, we'll understand how we can remove them, that they can be removed. They can be removed. So, if you just say, that's a pink thermos, I say, that's a pink thermos. And then you say, don't be silly, Robina, that's a black thermos. Oh, I'm so sorry, it's a black thermos. So a pink thermos is a thought in my mind. It's a thought. It's a thought. And black thermos is a thought in my mind. They're both thoughts. They're valid insofar as they are thoughts. But one is a valid concept, conventionally, and one is not. It's very simple. It's very simple. So I thought for a second it was pink. I wasn't holding on to it. This is not like grasping onto that believing. This is not the discussion here. It's a simple mistake I made. I thought it was pink. Then I sort of picked up the wrong one. Oh no, of course not. You're absolutely right. It's black. So the simple point is this. We agreed that I had the thought pink thermos, and I expressed it as a word. You said to me, don't be silly, it's black. I look with my eyes, I validate it, and I agree with you. And now I'm content, it is a black thermos. So the simple question is that what happened to the previous thought, a pink thermos? What happened to it? It's very simple. It disappeared into gone nothingness. There's not an atom of that thought left. And this is the point. What made the thought go is my conviction in the truth. So ego grasping believes there's an intrinsic me. When your wisdom in your mind finally sees the truth, that there isn't an intrinsic me, that wisdom replaces the ignorance. So where has the ignorance gone? Disappeared into a puff of smoke. And that ignorance and all the delusions that come from it can never come back because you've cut the root. That proves you can become Buddha. Because all Buddha is a mind that's unencumbered by all delusions. That's it. That's it. Not complicated. Just hard work to do it, that's all. It's not something mysterious, possessed Buddha nature. Not like that. Everything is empty. That's the ultimate Buddha nature. The conventional Buddha nature, if you like, is all the nuts and bolts of the work you do to get there, you know. The potential we have, conventional potential. You know. And the thing is, you know, yeah, when we understand even, this is where Mahamudra came. Mahamudra by Panchen Lama, 17th century Panchen Lama. It was a practice that was around for centuries, tracking it right back to Mapa and Milarepa and the great yogis. And it comes from the Kargyupas, you know. And that was the track. Some of the Galupas have a lot of the Sakya practices, a lot of the Kagyu practices, but it tracks right back to those Kagyu yogis. And it was always kept secret. It was just oral. It was passed on, disciple to disciple to disciple. And then in the Galupas, Panchen Lama in the 17th century was the first one to write it down. It's a very short text. And in this book of Mahamudra of Lamas, the text is there, you know, translated by Vula, who's one of our translators who lives in Sydney. Just read you from Mahamudra. It'll get you a bit it'll be uplifting. Lama always made us uplifted. I know when I first went to my first teachings, I listened to Lama Zopa for hours, I'd be totally depressed, you know. Then Lama Yeshe would come along and I'd just sigh with relief. Oh, thank God, it's possible. He'd lift me up. It was wonderful. Mahamudra, how to discover our true nature. So, like I said, you know, Mahamudra, I forget if we talked about it in these few classes, but I'll talk about it now. It's very straightforward. It's a meditation technique for realizing the emptiness of your mind, starting with the emptiness of self and then going to the emptiness of your mind. So it's just using the two modes of meditation that we know about so well. The first one is called single point of concentration, and the second is called insight. You know, so Mahamudra meditation utilizes these two. And it's a very specific approach. In the traditional approach, the approach that we're taking here, the step-by-step approach, the way you would combine, let's just do this now, a little bit about this now, how we would combine the two modes of meditation. Because here we're talking, in this Lam Rim, to remind ourselves, the Lam Rim, the first stages and the second part of it, the first and second scopes of the junior school and high school, that's the Hinayana component of the path. All those teachings are exactly what you'd practice if you're living in Thailand or Burma. But then there you'd graduate at that point. You'd achieve your own, you'd start controlling your body and speech, you'd live in vows, you'd do your purification, you go to the next level, you get concentration, meditation, you unpack and unravel the delusions, you get to see how they're nonsense, then eventually you realize emptiness. Because emptiness itself is a Theravadan teaching. Emptiness itself is taught in the middle, is a middle scope teaching. It's not in its nature a Mahayana teaching. And secondly, single point of concentration is taught there as well. But that's actually even Hindu, it tracks back to the Hindus. The kind Hindus and genius Indians invented that hundreds of years before the Buddha. So if you're at that level, you do all that same work, and then you go to the bodhisattva part, you get renunciation. Renunciation means you're really seeing the suffering caused by attachment mostly and all the other delusions. As Lama Zopa says, you've got renunciation when just the thought of another moment of attachment is so repulsive, it's like living in a septic tank. So way to go, okay? Way to go. We keep working at it. So then you move on to the Mahayana path now, on the Mahayana path. And you now you practice bodhicitta, you develop bodhicitta. There's all those stages, and you get to bodhicitta. Then the final stages of your practice on this path is you now practice the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva. The first 4, as I've said, are the practice of generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance. And they're all the things you practice in life after life after life after life, bopping from life after life as a bodhisattva, connecting to human beings, connecting to sentient beings, perfecting those 4. That's perfecting the compassion ring, if you like. Then the last 2 you do in your meditation. And here, when emptiness is taught in the context of the 6 perfections, that's when it's the Mahayana component. It's mixed with the bodhicitta. You practice bodhicitta day-to-day life, and then you practice emptiness in your meditation. And these 2 are perfected, and that's when you're a Buddha. So concentration, you can learn concentration whenever you want to. There's no one said you can't. You can start to meditate on emptiness in junior school if you want to, but it's taught in this logical progression in the final stages of the university level, of the middle, of the high scope, the great scope, So there, the last 2 of these are this is the traditional sutra approach. Sorry, not that. The traditional the traditional approach we're describing here, the gradual approach, not the Mahamudra approach. So the gradual approach, how you'd use the two modes of meditation in meditating on emptiness would be like this. You'd first, you'd sit down and you'd get some concentration. Whatever the object you're using is up to you, You'd use whatever object you have. You go home after your class, let's say. You've done your class, you've listened to your teachings on dependent arising that day, you go home and you want to meditate on it. So you've got to get some concentration first. So that obviously will be the degree of concentration that you've accomplished. So if you've already got to the 5th or 6th stage of concentration, wow, you do a good job. So you get your meditation and you go to that level. You get your mind stable in your concentration, whatever level you've got. So most of us might not have any, even the first level. That's okay. Whatever we've got, we do. You've got to focus the mind, get it clear first. Then you'd stop the concentration, but you'd use the sharpness that you've cultivated to the degree that you've got it, and you'd now go to the second mode of meditation, and you would open your notes, or if you're really good like the monks in the monasteries, they've memorized it all in their mind, best there, but if you've got your notes, you'd open your notes and you would then go through and think through what you've written down. This is what's called homework. It's nothing special. It's how we learn everything. How can you learn? It's like practicing the piano. It's like learning all your grammar if you're learning a language. It's like doing your math if you're studying math. It's exactly normal work. It's called getting insight into it. It's nothing special, nothing fantasy, nothing weird. But as soon as we hear the word analytical meditation is the technique we use, we get confused because we have a misconception about the word meditation. Well, surprisingly to us, the Tibetan word for meditation, the verb to meditate, is the verb gom. It literally means to familiarize yourself with something. Well, guess what? That means to practice it, to learn it. What do you think it means? It's very simple. But we get thrown because we think meditation is some weird thing. It's not. It's a method. You're familiarizing your mind. That's the real meditation. You see, technically concentration is not the real point. That's just a technique to get you to the point where you can now use the sharp, laser-like mind to do the real work of analysis. And analysis is a fancy word for to think about. So we get so thrown. But it's logical. It's how you learn everything. If you can't get some focus, you can't do your mathematics homework. If you can't get some focus, you can't memorize your language. You've got to have focus first. That's a method. It's just a tool. Then you go to the real work. Now you get the teachings. You go through the dependent arising, or you listen to your teacher saying it, and then during that analysis with your focus, and obviously the more subtle your focus, the deeper the meditation, the deeper the analysis. And that's the point here. When we think of single point of concentration, it is not discursive. It's true. No thoughts, please. But when you've got the focus, you hold that sharpness, and then you go to the second mode, and then you use that sharp mind to do analysis. The mind, when it gets to the subtlest level of concentration, you don't just bliss out into nothingness. You can use that at the subtlest level to do a subtle analysis of dependent arising so brilliantly you can't imagine the brilliance of that subtle dependent arising, the subtle analysis, the capability. Don't just think you've got to space out or something. No, you utilize that capacity, focus mind, to then think through dependent arising. And obviously the more subtle your concentration, the more profound and brilliant and capable is your analysis. We can't imagine like this. We can't imagine the subtlety of concentration, and so we can't imagine the subtlety of this type of analysis. It's like a genius level of, you see genius mathematicians with all those bizarre things all over the whiteboard, thinking it all through. You have that level of brilliance and clarity. Way more brilliant, yes, he says, when you've got concentration, way more brilliant than the best scientist, best computer even, the mind. We can't conceive of how brilliant the mind is. The capability for conceptuality. Subtle conceptuality. So you think through the dependent arising, and that is what triggers the aha moment, the insight. So in that type of meditation, you would stop the analysis right there, and you would now revert to the focusing mode, but on the insight, on the aha moment, until it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. You might hold it for 3 seconds, or you might, once you've really got it, you'll hold it for weeks, purifying your mind as you're doing it. And then you also go back and forth between the analysis and the focusing. That's the classic way in this approach to utilizing the two modes of meditation. But Mahamudra is different. It's utilizing the two modes of meditation. But the first one, you do your concentration, but the object you use, that you focus on, is initially whatever pops up in your mind. Your mind is the focus. Your mind is the object of meditation. You see, the thing is, when we look at the way they describe the mind is always considered like the subject. And Lama talks about this in Mahamudra. And it always necessarily has to have a thing that it cognizes. Cognition the subjective cognition cannot exist without an objective thing to be cognized. So the grosser the mind, the grosser the object. The subtler the mind, the subtler the object. There's always a subject and an object. When you've got direct realization of emptiness, they say these two merge and become the same experience. That's when you've got the direct realization. So the mind is, and Lama also, this is wonderful how they talk about the mind, and Lama talks about this in Mahamudra. Mind cognizes things like a mirror. This is very fascinating. This is, for example, I can't say your name, darling, from Brazil. How do I say your name? I forget.
Anugraha.
So Anugraha's point. If we can then start, even Anugraha, one type of analysis you could do, if you recognize, you see, we sort of merge with the feeling of depression, as you're saying, So your mind is doing something. So the mind is aversion. You see, the mind is aversion. Whether you're shouting and yelling or just as quiet, it's called aversion. It's not happy. It's not happy. It's aversion. In other words, it doesn't like it doesn't like something. It doesn't like something. Another way to put it, aversion is arising because attachment isn't getting an exciting thing. There's nothing to make the attachment happy. Do you understand what I'm saying? So a moment of happiness comes, and then when it subsides, we sink back into the aversion. So the mind, your subject, is the aversion. You've got to try and identify the object of that. What is that depression? What is that aversion cognizing? What is it thinking? You've got to try and see what it's thinking. And what it's thinking is whatever's arising in your day, it's just not, it's not nice. The sounds is not nice. The thing is not nice. There's nothing nice. So it's disappointed. So you've got to, so that's another way to look at it, just try and analyze. Because we just merge with that feeling, but there's two things going on. Aversion is the mind, it's a mirror, and it's reflecting, as Lama Yeshe says, when the mind is like in that way, your mirror, it's aversion mind, sort of flat, depressed, not agitated, angry like some people. It's the same type, but it's both aversion. But it's cognizing something. So whatever is out there is appearing back to you in the aspect of that mirror. So if the mirror is dark and depressed, everything will look and sound and appear dark and ugly. So that's where we've got to use thoughts to remember good things, to think of something good that lifts your mind, that makes then your mind will see things, then the aversion will subside, and then a kind mind will manifest, a generous mind or a loving mind. So we've got to work on that, to bring up another state of mind. And that's our problem. Because these states of mind just come, we didn't invite them. We just think we have to sink into them until they go away. No, we can consciously conjure up other thoughts if we can. Good thoughts, positive thoughts, virtuous thoughts, and that then will shine your mirror a little bit, and then things will look a bit more perky and exciting and nice. You've got to work on it. Also by accepting that it's just there and not paying attention to it. There's different approaches. So the mind is a mirror, and whatever the way the world out there, as Lama Zopa puts it, appears back to us, is in the aspect of that mirror. It's really powerful to think like this. But we're so merged with all the world out there, we can't distinguish our mind from what's happening. But we have to be able to identify, And in this way, a depression is not the Western view, it's aversion. Aversion means I don't like it. When attachment's there, we get excited and go, oh yeah, that's nice. But then it gets disappointed and we go back to the aversion again, back to the disappointment. So our mind is a mirror. And that's why, it's a good analogy. I mean, I always think of the analogy of a body of water on a riverbank. by the riverbank, totally clear water. The trees will appear accurately, won't they, in the water. But as soon as the water's turbulent, the trees will look crooked. And this is the point about conceptuality. It's really, the way they describe it when you study Buddhist epistemology, it's really quite complex how the conceptual mind works. It's actually beyond fascinating. It's unbelievably complex, I swear to you. But it's like we only ever see things in we see a reflection of things. We don't see things at all. I mean, we really have to study it to understand this. We just see reflections. So we don't see the tree on the bank. We're looking always in the mirror. The mirror's our mind, and everything out there reflects back into us. So we receive it in our mind, depending on what's in our mind. So obviously, if you've always got angry, everything will look ugly. If you're always loving, everything will look blissful. If you realize emptiness, everything will look profound. If you've got bodhicitta, everything will look different. Whatever's in your mind is the way that causes what's out there to appear back to you looking like that. And our trouble is we don't realize our mind is doing it, and we believe in whatever we see, and then we blame the thing. It's very delicious to think this way, you know. That's why we have to at least recognize what the delusion is. Okay, the world has this view, depression. It's very huge, but be more precise. It's called it's an internalized level of anger, aversion, and it's when attachment isn't getting something nice. It's when we're not happy. That's why we're not. It's just, so dissatisfaction starts. Then we think we're going to get something. Then we get something, and we're perky for a minute. We're happy for a minute. We're joyful for a minute, and then it subsides, and we go back into the dissatisfaction again. And this is it. So we have to work on it. Work on it, but understand it. The mind is like a mirror. It's a very powerful concept. And whatever things, the way things appear to us in the world, is according to what's in the mind. This is proving emptiness already. It's very powerful to remember this. We just sink into the way things appear. We never question. That's what Lama Zopa says. And this is very, very shocking because we think we're so intelligent in our planet. He says the vast majority of all human beings on this planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their life. That absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their life, because we are so addicted to what's out there and give all the power to what's out there, and we're this innocent victim of what goes on out there. That's how we live our lives. And I would say too, adding to that obviously, not only do we not know that what goes on in our mind plays any role in our life at all, we don't know what goes in our mind, period. So we're just living in profound ignorance, Very fascinating. So then Mahamudra, then how do you do that? Same thing, you're using the two modes of meditation. That's not different. So Mahamudra, the object of your concentration is not the Buddha, is not your breath, it is, in other words, it's immediately something more subtle. Okay, the Buddha's like internal, it's the mind itself. So the starting point, you just decide to concentrate on whatever pops up in your mind. And it's really confusing initially. The commonest thing people say is, oh, I couldn't see any thoughts. That's true, because we get so confused. I'm trying to find a thought, So you start with that, but eventually the object of concentration becomes what they call the clarity of your mind. And this seems a bit abstract for us, because it doesn't just mean you're thinking clearly about something. It's when the mind becomes a bit steady. Clarity of the mind is said to be the conventional nature of mind. Let's just see if I can read some Lama to make you happy. So Lama they typically say in the Mahamudra, you'd start your session with 9-round breathing, or you do your Guru Yoga, and then you do some 9-round breathing. That very lovely little technique to steady your mind. And then you do a bit of Guru Yoga, and then you would, Lama recommends Shakyamuni, and then you start to practice. Okay. So now the benefits of Samadhi. Have I read you about that? Have I read you the benefits of Samadhi? How you'd be if you had single point of concentration? It'll bliss you out. It'll mind boggle you. Let me read. Okay. The benefits of Samadhi are incredible. The Lamas in the text never talk about all this, but Lama likes to make us excited, to get us enthusiastic, to get us inspired. So without calm abiding, we cannot realize Mahamudra. As I mentioned, to achieve the realization of Mahamudra, the reality of non-duality. Okay, as I mentioned, to achieve the realization of Mahamudra, the reality of non-duality, we first need to develop calm abiding. In fact, it's not possible without it. We must achieve the subtler levels of consciousness of indestructible, one-pointed concentration, which what in Sanskrit we call Samadhi. So there's two terms here. There's shamatha, and I'm a bit confused here, I'm sorry. I'm not exactly right. Shamatha is single-pointed concentration, but Samadhi means concentration. So I don't know how they relate to each other exactly, but Lama kind of interplays them. So we'll just be a bit loose about it here. It is difficult to realize non-duality, and non-duality is another term referring to emptiness, okay? And this is the point here. It's difficult to realize non-duality, not because it's hiding from us. That $5 is staring you in the face. Emptiness is staring us in the face. Emptiness is the character of everything we're seeing at this second. We're as blind as bats, that's our problem. Not because it's hiding from us, but because our concepts are so thick. Our concepts are so thick. So we must refine our concepts. We must achieve subtle mindfulness, subtle awareness, and subtle clarity. Otherwise, there is no way we can see the unconscious levels of ego grasping an independent self. Not possible. Samadhi is the source of liberation. Liberation means liberation from suffering and its causes. It's before you've got the bodhicitta. Without perfect Samadhi, then, there is no way to become liberated from samsara and no way to achieve enlightenment. There's no exception. Whether we're Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or Buddhist, to cut the dualistic view, to cut this distinction between this dualistic view of a separate, independent me, we need calm abiding. But calm abiding is not enough. On the other hand, some people actually think that this state of samadhi, this one-pointed concentration, is all we need in order to cut the ego. But that is wrong. Lama Tsongkhapa reminds us that calm abiding alone is not enough to cut the dualistic view. We also need to develop special insight, or vipassana in Sanskrit. In Tibetan we call it lhak tong. Lhak meaning extra, tong meaning seeing. We can interpret this to mean that we go beyond seeing conventional reality and achieve the extra seeing of the universal reality of Mahamudra. So remember, Buddha taught many insight meditations, vipassanas. There's all kinds. One that's most popular in the world, almost like its own religion, and people tend to assume that is what vipassana means. It's just one example of one that Buddha taught, and there are many taught. But one is, for example, I've never done it, where you use your concentration, and then you do the insight mode, and you focus on the different sensations of the body. Is that correct, people? Some of you have done that? Okay, I haven't. But that Buddha's, what does he want us to get insight to? Not into our body, please, don't get confused. In the West we love it because it's all about the body. We love our bodies. We think it's so gorgeous, the body, What do you think Buddha wants you to get insight? Not into your body, for God's sake. He wants you to get insight into impermanence. That's the point. It's okay, some people work with their bodies. I'm very cynical, excuse me, forgive me. We had that discussion last week, I think. Barbara said something. So now the benefits of samadhi are incredible. Nevertheless, even without special insight. To finish, calm abiding is not enough. In other words, we need the two kinds of meditation together, calm abiding and special insight. So nevertheless, you see, the point is this, in the Tibetan Lamrim, they call the second one, they don't call it insight, they call it analytical meditation, don't they? All that's referring to is the technique that you use to trigger insight. It's just the common way they refer to it. Don't get confused. The goal is insight. The goal is calm abiding. And the names of the meditation are known in terms of the goal. But we tend in Tibetan to call it analytical meditation, which is the technique you use to get the insight. Do you understand? So now, nevertheless, even without special insight, the results of samadhi alone are unbelievable, almost unimaginable. So the Lama's whole point, since he began teaching Westerners, he was beyond unbelieving. What he wanted to do was pick us up from our misery, to show us we had potential, to try to get us to taste our goodness. He was unbelievable. I've never met anyone like him. From day one, it seemed that's what he did, you know. All he was trying to do was showing us our potential. That's why he taught even inner fire. He taught a variation of inner fire from day one practically, and its highest completion stage, Tantra. He was incredibly courageous, you know, to help us lift ourselves. It was amazing, Lama. He was extraordinary. So he wants to get us excited to see what out. And all this is doing is showing us the insane potential of the human mind. It's unbelievably inspiring, you know, what we're capable of. So when we understand this, when we realize how amazing the results are, we cannot help but to try to develop it. There is no way we become lazy. We'll have much energy and make great effort. We won't even worry about eating. I will explain some of the benefits. You go beyond sensory and conceptual consciousness. Now that, of course, is all we posit in our culture, is it not, you know? As your concentration develops, you will go beyond your body. Lama says we make the body the boss, you know. We're so addicted to our body. We see it as me, truly and utterly. This, as far as the universe is concerned, the materialist world, this is me. That's it. That's no wonder we're attached, you know. This is it. We are the body. Everything comes to the body, you know. We're obsessed with it. We make it the boss. Your mind will be, so when you go beyond your body, this is, you know, pretty stunning already. Your mind then will be non-conceptual. We can't even imagine that. So it becomes easy to cut the complex world of the five sense objects, to eliminate the superstitions. This is a word in Buddhist psychology. It's often used to refer to delusions. And you think about it, it's very accurate. What's a superstition? A superstition is believing in something that doesn't exist. Well, that's what all the delusions do. That's their job. They believe in something that don't exist. So in such a unified state, your mind becomes so subtle, so sharp, you can easily eradicate the complex dualistic thoughts. You can touch reality. This is the feature of Samadhi. And out of meditation, you can easily deal with your delusions. They are so light, you can stop them immediately. So Anugarara, can you imagine that? That's what we're capable of, you know. You experience bliss. This is hilarious. In the subtle state of concentration, you experience bliss, ecstatic bliss, just naturally. This is hard to conceptualize, hard to imagine. The more concentration you have, the more integrated you are, and thus the more rapture, the more bliss you experience. The point is, this is what's so stunning actually about the Buddhist view of the mind. This is what's so incredible. That is our natural state, when the mind is unencumbered by delusions. That's the point. Why we're miserable is because delusions are there. That's it. So simple. And this is the tragedy of samsara, and this is the analysis we have to learn to do. We've got time, haven't we? We'll keep doing. I'll finish this and I'll go back to this other point. To understand the clear analysis of how we create our samsara. Maybe we've got time, we'll do it next week, I'm not sure. It's very necessary to understand it. It's so profound. Then we'll really understand all the parts of our mind that are in play, and how we get sucked into attachments, objects, and fall into the trap of continuing our samsara, you know. In the beginning, the bliss you experience is physical, which is the grosser level. But as your concentration deepens, as you throw off the layers of blankets of grosser consciousness, you experience bliss exclusively at the mental level. This is because you've stopped perceiving the objects of the five senses, and you have closed the door to all the superstitions, to all the delusions, all the conceptions. All the contradictory concepts have disappeared. Your mind is now crystal clear. And the point about this, I have to talk about this now. Okay, go back to samsara. You see, what at the moment, being samsaric, that means we live in the mode of attachment. Default mode is attachment. It drives everything. Our virtues are on top. Our goodness is there, and that kind of calms the delusions down. But until we're out of samsara, this attachment runs the show. It's a default mode, and it always, every millisecond, is dissatisfied. Its nature is to be dissatisfied. So then the next level of attachment kicks in, which is therefore I better find something to make the pain go away. So we spend our day standing up, sitting down, going here, going there, turning this way, turning that way, having lunch, going to the toilet, getting up, going to bed, doing this. We fill our day, and every one of those just naturally, until we've got bodhicitta and until we practice, is driven by this instantaneous, spontaneous craving to get something. And why do we want to get something? Because we are desperate for happy feelings. This is quite profound. This is the analysis, Buddha's analysis. And in your life, from the second you wake up until the second you go to sleep, from the second you're born until the second you die, we can divide all our feelings, not the way we talk about it, there's only three kinds, into three categories. There's a very specific word, feelings. There's pleasant feelings, another word for happiness. Unpleasant feelings, another word for suffering. And then there's called neutral or indifferent, but really not to bother with those here. Don't even worry about those. So we know our life, everything we do, and the Buddha says driven by attachment, is to find something out there such that when we have contact with it, a pleasant feeling is triggered. That's what samsara is. So in other words, the logic of a samsaric person, who is a person driven by attachment and therefore aversion, etc., is that happiness, happy feelings, pleasant feelings, feeling all perky and fulfilled and content and nice, happy feelings, the only way we know how to get them is to have contact with object of the senses or something in our mind. We write all our stories in our mind to make ourselves happy, have our fantasies, you know. That's it. So this is what samsara is. This is what samsara is. So we do get pleasant feelings, but the Buddha says they're really polluted. The polluted pleasant feelings, because they're driven by the junky mind of attachment. They're driven by attachment. So our logic is that happiness is what we get when attachment gets what it wants. That's a samsaric person. That's the nightmare of samsara. And then when we do get the pleasant feelings, they last for like 1 second. Even the best bliss in the universe, from contact with your best body in the universe. That's the best bliss we'll probably get, people say. But you've got to keep doing it again. It doesn't last. It goes through its thing. Then you have to start touching the body again. You get the pleasure from the cake. It doesn't last. You've got to eat the cake again. Because we don't know how to sustain the pleasure, because we're so gross. And attachment pollutes the pleasure. It drags it down. It's very gross. It's like the pleasure of a junkie. It's really gross pleasure. But we don't know that because we don't know any better. But Buddha's saying, hey guys, I found a method to get happy feelings without relying on an object. Finally, actually it's Buddhahood, but this is the first step. So anybody who's done meditation, I remember when I always quote this, I interviewed Venerable Rene in 95 about one of his first 2.5-year retreats at Urselding in Spain. He said maybe he touched upon the 5th stage of concentration. So even at that level, it was described in terms of 9 stages of cultivation, you know. And he said, he sort of indicated something like this, that the pleasure he experienced in his mind was so superior to any pleasure he'd ever had through his senses. And any friends of mine who talk and they just mention they had a nice meditation or something, a really nice experience, they all say the other point about this, and this is the point here, Rama doesn't say it, when you've got rapture. Hear his words, please. He's serious. Rapture, ecstasy. I've never used those words in my whole life. I've never had anything remotely like that. But it's peaceful. But you look at our minds when we get pleasure. Even a cold water on a hot day, your mind's agitated. You get overexcited. So when we have pleasure, sexual pleasure, people go berserk. Because the mind's so agitated, so distressed, so frantic, so gross. But it's all we know. So Buddha isn't trying to make us miserable when he says we've got to give up attachment. He says, I found a much better method, and it's free. Just access your subtle mind. Get concentration. And this is not the goal. This ain't the goal. This is the goal. This is so stupendous, you can be forgiven for thinking this is liberation. That's where the Hindus got to. Unbelievable genius minds, bliss, pervading the universe, seeing the past, seeing the future. Clairvoyance is one of the qualities. I'll tell you. We can't even conceive of the qualities. You think you're Buddha already, you think you're God already. You just got Singapore to concentration. We've had it in countless lives, Lama says. All the Buddhas say we've had it in countless lifetimes. We didn't use it to realize emptiness. You can lose that. You can even lose bodhicitta until you realize emptiness. So as if you could count every atom, as your concentration grows stronger and you reach ever subtler levels, your mind becomes super powerful. From his own experience, Lama Je Tsongkhapa says that you can reach a point of such clarity in your meditation that your mind feels almost infinite. These are real, direct experiences, okay? This is the potential of our mind. Your mind is so clear, so sharp, it's as if you can distinguish all the subtle physical energies. You'll have the courageous thought, I can count all the atoms of the universe. This level of mind is more powerful than even scientific instruments. He's being quite literal. You'll have an experience of space. As you develop your concentration on the clarity of your consciousness, you'll reach a point where you will only be at a conscious level, as we discussed. You've gone beyond the physical, beyond the world of the five senses. And because you have thrown off the blankets of all the superstitions, the heavy wrong conceptions, you'll feel so unified, and you'll have an experience of space, universal space, like as big as the universe. Your mind is like vast. You'll always be joyful. When you arise from meditation, you feel liberated instead of uncertain and full of doubts and conflicts. You experience inner peace. You will always have a happy, joyful vibration. In fact, you continuously experience tremendous pleasure. This is hard to imagine. You will continue to experience tremendous pleasure naturally. Now the pleasure of chocolate is nothing. What you can now experience with your mind is super. It's like another realm, another dimension. And when your senses do come into contact with their objects, of course, you experience bliss then too. You hardly even notice whether it's night or day. Actually, even now, when you have samsaric happiness, you have a similar kind of experience. You dance and drink all night, intoxicated with the pleasure. Time just flies. Well, this is what happens when you're intoxicated with the blissful experience of Samadhi. Your body feels so light. When you are out of meditation, the heavy energy of your body vanishes. Your body feels like a brand new body. You feel so light, almost as if you could fly, almost as if you had no body at all. The point is of these experiences, many people can say they've had this kind of experience, but like once or twice. And we hear it, we think of it as like a bonus, and we call it a spiritual experience. We don't know where it came from, and we don't know how to get it again. And that's how fragile our experiences are in our culture. We really do think of meditation as an experience. Oh, I had a nice meditation. But we don't understand what we're doing. We're training. This is our natural potential. And when you've got concentration, you're like this all the time. It's like you just, instead of just, you say, you go to the piano and you suddenly play a nice sound. Oh, it's a lovely piece of music, Robina. Play it again. Oh, no, it just came. It's like a gift. You don't know where it comes from because you don't know the techniques to do it all the time. This is the techniques to do it all the time. And we've had this in countless lives. But you lose it. You can lose this. You can lose all. I said you can even lose bodhicitta up to a certain point. Until we have realized emptiness. None of our realizations are stable. That's why we've got to keep practicing every second of the day and every life. To keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Don't be complacent. You develop clairvoyance. So Lama Tsongkhapa says that you'll develop clairvoyance. According to the Abhidharma teachings, there are two kinds of clairvoyance. One is what we understand as intuition, an untrained sense that we all have to some extent. For example, you might feel strongly without any logical proof that something has happened to your dear friend back home. The other can be gained by training the mind in meditation, as we are discussing here. You are able to see long distances as well as other people, including their minds. At first, your experience seems like a bit like a dream, but the more your concentration develops, the more clearly you can see, just as you would if you were there in person. This kind of clairvoyance is not imagining something. It is real, in the present, not a fantasy. Normally, with your deluded thoughts, you can create images of your boyfriend in your mind when he's not there, and it's almost as if he's real. But when it's clairvoyance, you literally see your boyfriend. This is the capability of our mind. The Indians, well before the Buddha, discovered all this, This has been around for 3,000 years, this knowledge. It's very amazing. We're only just learning it now with clever scientists.
When I heard you talking about Mahamudra and this meditation, you mentioned often, you just practice 5 minutes. But I'm 65. I don't want to miss another life. So can you please give us some more direction for a more profound practice? Because I keep doing 3 times a day, 5 minutes. But how many lives I'm going to take it to realize emptiness,
Anugrah, I don't know. Without being personal, I don't know what to ask you about your practice. Do you have practices on the path or not?
Yes, I do. I practice shamatha 24 minutes every day. Then I do metta bhavana for 12 minutes a day. That's what my lama told me to do.
Do you have any other initiations or bodhisattva vows or tantric vows, anything like that?
No, I just help the center.
I understand. So you have a wish to go further in your practice? You like the Tibetan Buddhist approach?
Yes, I do.
Then, okay, so the thing is, so have you taken refuge?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well,
not officially.
I understand, darling. I understand that. I understand that. So then, so the way we're presenting here, there are certain practices that are super powerful and that we need to have as a basis in order to grow our practice properly. Okay? So on the one hand, we have our different meditations like you're doing, which is beautiful. But the deeper level of practice, according to the Buddhist teachings, the very first one, we need to have the commitment of refuge if we're on this path, and then we need to have taken the lay person's vows. So we've got no time to talk about this today, but living in vows, we can't really, if we have living in vows, see, the first level of practice is behaving nicely, not killing, not stealing, not lying. You're doing all that, right? Aren't you?
Yeah.
Aren't you? So the Buddha says, by living in a good life of ethics, in the framework of living in vows, the vows are so powerful that every second, 24 hours a day that you're not killing, not stealing, not lying, not harming, even when you're not thinking about it, 24 hours a day when you're doing it in the context of living in vows, you're purifying your mind like unbelievably, and you're putting atomic bombs under your delusions. So that's a major practice that for the long term. Then you go to the next level, and you would then, you'd then purify your karma. So that's an incredibly powerful practice every day that puts atomic bombs on all the old habits from countless lifetimes. And purification is a practice. It's like doing the weeding in a garden. Your garden can't grow if it's choked by the weeds. So many of these practices, and they're all done in this orderly way, living in vows and doing purification, are stupendously powerful practices that you don't see the evidence of them. You don't sit there and keep a vow like sitting in meditation. It's in your mind stream, and it's already purifying your mind hugely every second you have vows. So when we understand that, just knowing we're living in our vows, it makes us more happy, knowing we're doing long-term benefit. And the fact is, to get the life that you've got now, a moral life, a human life with good tendencies, a wish to practice, that's because you've lived in vows in the past. So then you need to aspire every day when the time comes, when the time is right. You request one of your teachers, whoever you decide who are your teachers, and these days it might have to be via Zoom. You really want to have this as an active aspiration in your mind. When I'm ready, may I meet because you could have many teachers. Can I take refuge and take the lay person's vows? And even just knowing that you've got this in your mind stream, knowing the benefits of these practices, that'll already make your mind happy. And you're doing the long-term long-term benefit. Then you go to the next level and you take the bodhisattva vows. Then you go to the next level and you do these other practices like empowerment into the different practices of the deities. These are the really potent levels of practices. You could sit there and watch your breath for 4 million years, but in its nature, it's not a very strong practice. It has to be underpinned by vows and by commitments and other practices. Then you can get confidence that you've got a good practice, and you can have patience and humility and know that long term you'll be doing all, you're setting us up for the long term benefit. That's the bigger approach we need to have, sweetheart.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Good,
Thank you.
darling. Good.
Thank you so
And just
much.
that makes us happy. Well, you see, the other thing is, for me, I find the analogy very powerful. It's like, it's a really good one, and we sort of understand it in daily life. But if you had a big, like a hectare of land, and you wanted to grow a vegetable garden or a rose garden or something, and you start at the beginning, there's nothing there. It's barren. There's nothing there. So it's going to be a while before you see your garden. It could be 20 years before you see your garden. So you don't go out into the garden on the first day and then go out the next day and see there are no roses and get depressed. That's a foolish misconception. It takes time. So we've got to have that long-term view here, and that should give you confidence. So even when you walk out into your garden and tomorrow you start digging it up, it might look like a disaster, even better, worse than it looked yesterday, but you know you're doing the work. You're pulling out the weeds, you're getting it ready, and then you have a vision of what you want your garden to look like. Then you put the seeds in and you nourish them every day. Even after 6 months you mightn't see anything grow, but you know you're doing the work. You know there is something growing. You don't keep expecting results every day. You've got the long-term view. I can't stress how important this is for our practice. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
It's really important to have that attitude.
Yeah.
So you keep working up the centers. You enjoy doing that? She helps the center in Rio. It's wonderful.
Yes, I like very much. Yeah. It's been my life for
Has it a long time?
Yeah.
Wonderful, amazing.
Sorry. Yeah. So I came to know the center because of you, because I had this dream about studying with you.
Oh, you did?
And
oh, my
I
goodness.
get along very well.
Oh, I'm very happy. Good, darling. You keep doing it, sweetheart.
So I might ask you to be my teacher for the vows.
We'll see. Well, you think about it and see what happens. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Venerable.
Much love
Thank
to
you
everybody.
So much.
Let's just do our little prayers to end, okay? Be so happy we've done. See, we've just done 2 hours of gardening. When we realise this, we'll get so happy. Just be content we've done it. Not, in other words, this is a crucial point to finish with our point. We tend to judge if something's good. We want to feel good. But you might come out of your garden exhausted, but you are happy because you know you've done the work. That's the kind of way we've got to be happy, not just from good feelings. We've got to be happy that we've done this work. That should make us happy. Good. We've sowed the seeds, and that's fantastic. So be like that today. So we dedicate these seeds we've planted. May we nourish them with our moment from this moment forward with all our practice, so that we can become Buddhas, as we said in the beginning, so that we can benefit others. How amazing. Gewadi nyududag lama sange drugyune drowa chikyang malupa jai sala kupasho. And may bodhicitta, this precious jewel bodhicitta, this outrageous aspiration to never give up benefiting others, may it grow and grow. Jangchob semchog rinpoche, ma kye panam ke gyuchig, kye panyam pa me payang, gong ne gong du pa ba shog. Okay. Oh yes, this is Lama Zopa's new prayer for His Holiness. The wish-fulfilling, wish-guarding, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in the world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And Lama Zopa put it in up to. And then Lama Zopa, because he's the Lama of our centre, whether he's your Lama or not, but we hope he lives long because he's quite a beneficial person. Think like that. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving and spreading Manjunath, Manjushri's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honouring the three jewels, saviour of myself and others, your disciples. Please, please live long, and may all of our teachers live long. Okay? That's enough. Thank you. Goodbye, darlings. Next In 2 weeks, yeah? So
Yes,
read
2
a bit of
weeks.
Dependent Arising, read the Heart Sutra every now and again, think about what we said, okay? And we'll keep moving. Thank you, darling.
Thank you.
So much.
Live long,
Bye,
Robina.
sweethearts.
Thank you,
Bye.
Venerable.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.